questioner pointed out that ownership of the data, whether it's legal or done via SLA through some kind of contractual obligation, is one thing, but de facto control of the data still exists within the cloud provider or the SaaS or PaaS provider. And the question then remains, how can the enterprise or the organization effectively still maintain control of their data? One possible way to do it is to encrypt the data before it leaves the organizational boundary, so that when the data goes into the cloud environment, not only in transit, but gets to the database, to its destination database or the application, and interacts with the application that's going to use that data, the data is encrypted at all times and is only ever decrypted when it gets back into the enterprise. And so the keys for encrypting that data are held by the organization, and it's never possible for that data to be decrypted outside. And to do that while still maintaining server-side functionality and all the business logic in the SaaS applications at the same time.
I agree with you. I think that's one of the big challenges, and we have worked with one agency in particular trying to use that approach for infrastructure as a service. I think that there are still some challenges, though, when you try to use the encryption, because especially if you move up the stack as far as the models you're trying to use as far as the cloud computing environment. But I think the idea of some kind of self-protecting model where you're recognizing that you have responsibility for protecting that data once you put it into that CC, the cloud computing environment, is a good way of looking at it, because you can't, there's that trust relationship, and it may be different, again, if you're looking at a private cloud. We have a higher level of trust, perhaps, than we have with a public cloud provider, until you have some kind of track record that may change that trust relationship, right? Whether it be going through a FedRAMP program or something, but I think if you're going to use public cloud providers today, you have to have a self-protecting model of that for that data.
So people have proposed the idea of encrypting data before it goes into a cloud many times before. And when they have, I think they meant, and I always assumed they meant, sort of just bulk data storage. And so the person asking the question, he runs a company that it does just this. As far as encrypting, not bulk storage, but encrypting data before it goes into a cloud. And so yes, I was up at 4 in the morning thinking, how could you, in a SaaS application, encrypt data and stick it in a SaaS application, and what could that application still do? And I find it quite fascinating to think of what can be done and what can't be done. And certainly there is a lot that can't be done, but I convinced myself that there are useful applications in which that architecture could work. So anyway, so thank you for opening my mind to that. It was fun to think about it at 4 in the morning.
Data's hard, right? Because I sit at both a consumer and a provider of cloud services. As a provider, my customers expect me to have multiple redundant locations and backups and recovery. So I've got the data in multiple locations. I have to, by definition, I have to. But I also have some questions about who owns the data. Who can I show it to? Under what conditions can I show it to? What about court orders? What about FOIA? What about all these things? So as we ask the data questions, it's not just how do I get my data back, or how do I make sure my data is destroyed. It's how do what's the life cycle, and what's the governance process for that data? We've got just a few more minutes. Go ahead.
This question is really targeted at Albert. For race, can you talk to us about what the business case was to drivers? Any new metrics that you've had to put in place to track against it? And how are you doing against it?
So the business drivers fall in line with the characteristics of the cloud. One of the things that we wanted to have in place, so when you think about a business case, it was not just simply in economics, which was one of the biggest drivers, but it was the rapid elasticity and the rapid provisioning of capability for a agency to come in and do software development. And so that was the initial tenets, to come in, how quickly can you get a capability in place so you start initial software development and test with the mindset to move it toward a production environment. So that was probably one of the biggest tenets. The second tenet is, of course, taking advantage of the virtualization techniques that allowed us to better utilize the infrastructure that we already had in the infrastructure. So on average, if you think about an enterprise computing infrastructure, I will guarantee you, and I will bet you, a dinner, that nobody's using more than 20% utilization on their environments unless they're doing some good provisioning, virtualization. They just do not, and so the opportunity was there economically to virtualize, build virtual machines across all my infrastructure to put that capability in place and get better utilization on the platform base. In terms of how we're doing right now, we are almost, in terms of the virtual machines that are available in the infrastructure, we're almost full. And we're now starting to scale additional more virtual machines because of the usage. Probably the biggest usage that we have right now in the department is a partnership that we have with the Army called Army for Apps, which is where we're building the infrastructure as a service, and they're coming in and building a software as a service capability on top of that for doing small app development for the warfighter. So it has been a very good partnership with the Army in terms of getting capability out there quickly, evaluating and fielding it if it made sense.
Greg, we haven't heard from you in a while. Any last words? We're out of time, sir.
I just think since this is some very interesting things brought up here, one of the things that was lingering and I was kind of noodling on back to the encryption, and the model you described, even if you encrypt a machine, a virtual machine, this idea of infrastructure as a service or dynamic capacity, that virtual machine is unencrypted when it's running. Well, then that's a discussion. Maybe you need to educate me after this. So I'd like to understand how you do that, because if the box on which it lives is compromised, anything that's decrypted in memory is available.
Yeah, don't try to understand the technology here. Do it afterwards.
Yeah, that's
Technology, hit the bar, get some wine. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and we are all around. So